Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, Atlanta, on an ordinary morning. The scene looked no different from thousands of other mornings. Hurried passengers, suitcases rolling across the glossy marble floors, and repeated announcements crackling over the loudspeakers. Travelers bustled about, exchanging hurried hugs and emotional goodbyes amidst the endless murmur of conversations. Everyone was preparing for their journey. But in those familiar moments, no one noticed that today, an event was about to unfold that would completely change their perception of discrimination and human dignity. It all began with a sudden sound, piercing through the noisy, bustling atmosphere of the airport. A sharp crack rang out, like the firing of a gun, causing everyone to freeze and turn toward the source of the noise. A bamboo cane had fallen onto the cold stone floor, producing a sharp, jarring clatter. Immediately, an unusual silence blanketed the space. People saw an elderly woman with wrinkled skin and silver hair standing quietly at the boarding gate. Her pale blue eyes were wide with surprise, her hand trembling as she instinctively raised it, as if to shield herself from an unexpected threat. She didn't scream or cry out. She simply stood there, gazing in stunned silence at the cane that had fallen from her hand. Those nearby paused, casting sympathetic glances at her, but no one dared to approach or offer help. Only the soft rustle of luggage wheels and a few whispered murmurs broke the silence. It wasn't just the shock of a minor accident that had captured everyone's attention. It felt more like a confrontation between serenity and chaos, between nobility and contempt. Standing before her was Caroline Whitmore, a flight attendant whose cold exterior exuded self-assuredness. She was in charge of the first-class boarding area for this flight and believed it was her right to decide who was allowed to board and who was not. With a look of blatant disdain, Caroline stood there, arms crossed, her sharp eyes flicking over Meredith Winslow as though she were just another insignificant passenger. Without a hint of compassion, Caroline stepped forward and shoved Meredith's hand aside. "I told you already, get out of the way, old woman," Caroline barked, her voice sharp as ice. "First class isn't for people like you." A heavy silence engulfed the terminal. Every passenger stood still, no one daring to utter a word. Their eyes shifted from Caroline to Meredith, and back again. Everyone fully aware that this was turning into a battle not just of authority, but of dignity and respect. Yet no one intervened. Meanwhile, Meredith remained where she was, unhurried, unmoving. Neither woman rushed to act. They stood as opposites, one calm and patient, the other unable to conceal her disrespect and arrogance. Meredith's hand trembled, but slowly she bent down to retrieve her bamboo cane from the stone floor. Each of her movements was gentle, unhurried, imbued with an almost otherworldly calmness. It was as if time itself held no sway over her, despite the urgency and chaos swirling around. She rose, adjusted her clothing, and looked straight at Caroline, not with anger, but with a tranquility so profound it made Caroline visibly uneasy. It wasn't a look of rage, but one that carried such strength that even the most powerful would be compelled to question themselves. If you find this story dramatic and full of surprises, don't forget to hit like, share, and comment your thoughts. Let us know what you think about Caroline's behavior and how Meredith handled the situation. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next fascinating story. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career," Meredith said softly, her voice steady yet powerful enough to resonate through the tense silence of the airport. A visible shock rippled through the crowd. The passengers around them stood with mouths agape, no one daring to move. Caroline stood frozen, her earlier confidence draining away. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to say something, but no words came out. Meredith watched her quietly, not with anger, but with a silent, piercing assessment, as if she were wondering whether Caroline truly grasped the gravity of what she had just done. Remaining perfectly composed, Meredith continued, You think you have the right to treat others this way just because of a first-class ticket. Caroline, unable to formulate any response, simply stood there with a bewildered expression. She had rushed to judgment far too quickly. Now, confronted by Meredith's calm yet undeniable authority, she began to realize just how grievously she had erred. And it wasn't because she lacked confidence or courage, but because Meredith didn't need to raise her voice or hurl insults. A single composed statement from her was enough to bring the entire terminal to a stunned halt. Little did anyone know that in the next few seconds, both Caroline's life and the lives of those who witnessed this confrontation would be irrevocably changed. Meredith Winslow was not an ordinary passenger. She was the founder and president of one of the world's largest airlines, a woman who had built her company from nothing to industry dominance. And Caroline, in her rush to judgment, had just insulted the most powerful person she could encounter. Determined not to be perceived as a weak or indecisive, Meredith did nothing more than stand her ground, maintaining her patience and dignity. Even though no one yet knew her identity, everyone could sense the silent power she radiated at that moment. The silence in the first-class area of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport seemed to stretch on endlessly, but finally a sound shattered the stifling atmosphere. It was the sound of Caroline Whitmore's sigh, repeated as if she were trying to calm the confusion churning within her. Although her expression remained largely unchanged, the pride that had once gleamed in her eyes had faded. The surrounding passengers began to turn their backs, unwilling to witness any more of this humiliation. Yet no one could look away from the undeniable truth. Caroline had made a serious mistake. Within just a few minutes, a profound shift had taken place. While Caroline still could not utter a word, Meredith had quietly turned away, as if nothing had changed. She moved slowly, but every step she took echoed through the hushed space, as if every breath she drew was imbued with strength. While those around them remained bewildered and awkward about Caroline's actions, Meredith acted in a manner entirely different. She was in no rush. Her deep, composed gaze did not need to express anger, because she knew she didn't have to. Caroline was the one at fault, not her. One of the passengers nearby, a middle-aged man named Sebastian Drake, sat up straight. An uncomfortable feeling welled up inside him, one he couldn't quite explain. He had witnessed the entire scene from start to finish, and although he hadn't initially wanted to get involved, something about it felt deeply wrong. He rose, meaning to step forward and say something, but then he hesitated. Why should he? Everyone had seen what happened. Surely something would be done. Caroline, her face burning with humiliation, remained motionless. She knew she had abused her authority, but instead of apologizing immediately, she merely stood there, muttering indistinctly. She was fully aware of what was about to happen. After all, she was a first-class flight attendant, and among them being challenged like this was rare and serious. A few minutes later, while Meredith continued to move naturally, all eyes seemed to follow her. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically, from Caroline's initial mockery to a suffocating silence hanging over the first-class area. "Do you need any help, ma'am?" A gentle voice spoke from behind Meredith. Alexander Hartwell, a refined-looking, middle-aged man, stepped closer to her, his voice full of genuine respect. He had been seated nearby and had witnessed the entire incident, but he had no intention of letting Meredith endure such indignity alone. Meredith offered him a soft smile and nodded politely. "Thank you. I'm fine," she replied, her voice light and soothing, carrying no trace of pain. She continued walking toward the boarding gate, her gaze never once flickering back to Caroline, as if everything had already been made clear. All she did was maintain her calm and composure, refusing to be swept away by anger or resentment. Caroline remained rooted to the spot, feeling as if the world was tilting around her. She stared after Meredith, but no words came. A gnawing sense of guilt began to consume her from within, and she knew that the time to pay the price had come. As Meredith neared the boarding gate, Caroline still did not dare to move forward. She silently watched from behind, her mind in turmoil. The other passengers no longer looked at her with respect. Instead, their gazes were filled with suspicion and contempt. Some even turned their faces away, unwilling to be associated with the disgrace that had just unfolded. At that moment, a man in a black suit, clearly a high-ranking airline official, approached Caroline. He stopped in front of her, his eyes sharp as knives. "Miss Whitmore, I think we need to have a conversation," he said, his voice low but brimming with authority. Caroline froze. She immediately understood this was no random encounter. Her actions could not be brushed aside so easily. The man led Caroline through the waiting area, past the swirling drafts at the terminal gates. The surrounding passengers began to murmur. All eyes followed Caroline, but she no longer had the confidence or arrogance she had tried so hard to maintain. When he led her into a private room, Caroline felt suffocated. Inside the room stood another man, a senior executive, already waiting for her. They said nothing at first, only stared at Caroline with cold, unsympathetic eyes. Reality was beginning to sink in. "We are aware of what you have done." The airline director finally spoke, his voice as cold as ice. "You didn't just mishandle your interaction with a passenger. You committed an unforgivable act within this company." Caroline stood frozen, speechless. She had foolishly believed she could act without consequence. But now, the undeniable truth stood before her. Caroline Whitmore could not have imagined what was about to happen. As the director's icy gaze locked onto her, a wave of unease rippled through her body. She had once been one of the top flight attendants, always proud of her work and the decisions she made. But now, faced with a grave mistake, she couldn't understand how everything had spiraled so far out of control. The small, cold room where Caroline had been offered no warmth, no comfort. She stood there, her hands clasped together, her head bowed low. Suddenly she felt so small, like a child who had made a terrible mistake, standing before stern adults. The senior executives who held the power to decide her fate surrounded the table, their sharp gazes devoid of any pity. "You know you've committed a serious mistake," the director spoke, his voice cold but firm, offering no trace of compassion. "We're not just talking about a minor error. You abused your authority, disrespected a passenger without proper consideration, and that is completely unacceptable in this company." Caroline could hear her heart pounding violently in her chest. There was no denying it. Every word was true. Each statement from the director cut into her like a blade, and she had no way to argue. She knew she was wrong, but that didn't mean she was ready to face the consequences. In reality, she had no idea what to do, and that uncertainty made her feel even more lost. "What do you think about your actions?" another executive asked, his tone full of judgment. Caroline could not meet their eyes. She lowered her head, mumbling incoherent words. Her vision blurred with tears. She could not accept the overwhelming shame she was experiencing. I just thought that she didn't deserve to be here." Caroline's voice faltered, the words tightening around her throat. The executives around her didn't respond immediately. They simply stared at her, each in turn, saying nothing, silently waiting for her to fully acknowledge her mistake. Finally, the first director spoke again, his voice still devoid of any leniency. "You judge someone solely based on appearances. You were wrong. She is the founder and president of this airline. And you, a flight attendant, thought you had the right to judge her, to humiliate her in front of other passengers." Caroline felt as if the ground beneath her feet was collapsing. "Meredith Winslow." She repeated the name in her mind, her head spinning. It couldn't be. She couldn't believe what she had done. She had insulted the founder of the airline, the very person who deserved the utmost respect and protection. How could she have judged her simply because of a first-class ticket she thought was unfitting for someone like her? She sat there bewildered, feeling trapped by her own mistakes. At that moment she realized that there was no salvaging the situation, no way to turn back. The next question startled Caroline. The third director, who had been the quietest throughout the conversation, finally spoke. "Do you realize the seriousness of what you've done?" The question was not just evaluative. It carried a grave warning. These words were not meant to invite excuses. They were meant to make Caroline truly understand that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. Caroline lifted her tear-filled eyes. I was wrong," she choked out, the words difficult to say. "I had no right to judge her like that. I thought she couldn't possibly be a first-class passenger. But I was wrong. I rushed to judgment. I didn't verify her ticket. I didn't inquire about anything. I just judged based on appearances." She fell silent, the weight of her regret swelling inside her. The words she had spoken could not undo anything, but at least she knew she had finally acknowledged her mistake. It was the first step in facing what she had done. The directors didn't respond immediately. They simply observed her, as if weighing whether her admission was genuine. Caroline could feel their sharp, assessing gazes. Some exchanged glances, clearly deliberating whether she was capable of redeeming herself. Finally, the first director spoke again, his voice still cold but slightly less harsh. "We will give you a chance. But you must understand, this is not a free opportunity. If you wish to continue working here, you will have to undergo a complete process of learning and transformation. First, you will need to participate in training programs on leadership, respect, and the proper way to evaluate passengers without letting prejudice cloud your judgment." Caroline could hardly believe her ears. She had fully expected to be fired on the spot. But no, she was being offered a precious chance. She said nothing, merely nodded silently, feeling as though she could finally breathe a little easier. However, she knew this was her only opportunity, and if she failed to seize it, there would be nothing left to say. Caroline Whitmore left the meeting room with a whirlwind of emotions. She couldn't believe she had escaped immediate dismissal. Amid the cold stares and harsh criticism, she had nearly crumbled. But instead she was granted a chance few could ever imagine, a chance to make amends, to learn and to change. But did she have the strength to do it? After the meeting, Caroline returned to the first-class area, where the passengers were still quietly watching her. They no longer looked at her with respect or admiration, but with a heavy, silent judgment. She could feel their eyes upon her, eyes that had witnessed everything. Even though she had apologized and admitted her mistake, she wondered if a simple apology could ever erase what she had done. She asked herself whether she could truly change in the face of those watchful eyes. Meredith Winslow, the woman she had publicly disrespected, still sat calmly in first class, showing no signs of anger. Instead, Meredith continued reading her book, appearing serene as if nothing had happened. She exhibited no rage, no hatred toward Caroline. Only a calm, unshakable presence, a dignity that could not be disturbed. Caroline realized that Meredith could have easily demanded her removal from the flight, but she hadn't. Instead, Meredith allowed her to face her failure, to confront and recognize the weight of her actions. As Caroline approached her section, Meredith looked up. Her calm gaze made Caroline feel exposed, but not in a negative way. Meredith's eyes, seasoned by a life filled with experience, lacked any trace of anger or bitterness. Meredith closed her book, set it aside, and looked at Caroline slowly, as if evaluating the change stirring within her. Caroline felt as though Meredith was seeing through every layer of pretense she had built over the years. "You know," Meredith began, her voice gentle yet commanding, "sometimes we don't need to judge people by appearances. I've lived long enough to understand that every person carries their own story. Today you've learned a significant lesson. But this lesson isn't meant to make you feel terrible. It's meant to help you realize that any one of us can make mistakes. Caroline stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. Meredith's words echoed in her mind, not as criticism but as profound advice. She could easily have rejected this opportunity for change, brushed everything aside, and continued living the way she always had. But Meredith had helped her see that change was a personal decision, and now was the time for Caroline to give her life a new meaning. Meredith continued, "Every person holds value, and only when we see each other with genuine hearts can we begin to change the world around us. But if we cling to prejudice, all we will do is harm those around us." Caroline felt a tightness in her chest. She hadn't seen this truth throughout her career. She had always believed she was doing the right thing, but reality was very different. She had become too self-satisfied, too quick to judge without understanding. The lesson Meredith offered was not merely about respect. It was about compassion and the ability to embrace differences. At that moment, Caroline realized something. She couldn't change the past, but she could change her actions and mindset starting now. As she turned and walked toward the airplane door, Meredith smiled softly. "The important thing is that you recognized it," Meredith said warmly, "and now you can begin your new journey, a journey filled with challenges, but also with hope." Caroline said nothing. She simply nodded and walked away, this time not with arrogance, but with humility, and a clear awareness of her responsibility. As she reached her seat in the first-class section, Caroline understood that although she would likely face many difficulties and judgments in the days ahead, she had been given a chance to make things right. And although the future was unpredictable, she was determined not to waste this opportunity. After the flight, Caroline Whitmore felt as if she had just stepped out of a nightmare. Although she had admitted her mistake and been allowed to make amends, the feelings of guilt and shame still lingered within her. She walked out of the airport with blurred vision from anxiety, her mind filled with thoughts about an uncertain future. Could she truly change? Could she erase the prejudices that had been ingrained in her mind for so many years? The next day, Caroline entered the Airline's training center where she would begin her journey of transformation. Everything was completely different from what she was used to. This wasn't just a standard training session to learn a few new skills and continue her job. It was a long, challenging journey to change not just her professional abilities, but her mindset and attitude as well. Upon entering the training room, Caroline encountered former colleagues, but this time they no longer looked at her with admiration. Instead, their eyes silently observed her, waiting to see whether she could truly change. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with skepticism, believing she was merely trying to hold on to her position without genuinely transforming. Everyone sat in a circle, each person given a chance to share their story. Caroline felt a flutter of nervousness when it was her turn. She took a deep breath and stood up. Looking into the eyes of those around her, she no longer felt arrogance or insecurity, only sincerity. "I was wrong," Caroline began, her voice soft but steady. "Throughout my career I believed I knew who deserved what. I judged people based on appearances, based on what I thought was right, but I was wrong. And I made a grave mistake in how I treated a passenger like Meredith Winslow. That day I failed to see the respect she deserved. I saw her only through the superficial lens, without once looking deeper at who she truly was." She paused for a moment, then continued, "I cannot change what happened. But I won't allow myself to continue living in arrogance and ignorance. I will learn from my mistakes and strive to become a better person, not just a better employee, but someone who knows how to respect and care for those around me." Those around her watched. Some nodded, others remained silent, but the judgmental and skeptical stares were gone. Caroline realized that not everyone was ready to forgive her yet, but at least she had faced the truth and accepted that change would not come instantly. Throughout the training, Caroline learned many things. She didn't just learn how to communicate effectively with passengers, she learned how to listen and how to respect people, regardless of their background or circumstances. She learned not to let prejudice dictate her thoughts, and not to judge others by appearances. But the most important lessons Caroline learned were humility and patience. Each day she had to confront herself, reflect on her past mistakes, and ask difficult questions about who she truly was. She had to learn how to manage her negative emotions instead of letting them dictate her actions. And with each small step she realized that although transformation was not easy, it was necessary. 1 month later, Caroline had undergone a noticeable change. She was no longer the arrogant, self-important flight attendant she once had been. Though she still experienced moments of tension and worry, she now approached every situation with calmness and respect. She realized that every passenger had value and deserved to be treated fairly, not because of who they were or how much money they had, but simply because they were human beings. Then one day, as Caroline was preparing for a flight, she unexpectedly encountered Meredith Winslow again. This time Meredith wasn't seated in first class, but had chosen to sit in the economy section. Caroline couldn't help but feel surprised. But instead of avoiding Meredith like she once might have, she walked up to her with a genuine smile. "Hello, Meredith," Caroline said, her voice gentle, free from the awkwardness or fear she once carried. "I'm very grateful that you gave me a chance to change." Meredith looked up and smiled softly. "You've done very well," she said, her voice calm but filled with strength. "But what's important is that you understand. Change doesn't come just from doing the right thing. It comes from recognizing and correcting our mistakes." Caroline felt a wave of relief wash over her as she heard those words. It was a major step forward in her journey of transformation. Not only had Meredith recognized her efforts, but even those around her had noticed the change in the way she now viewed and treated others. She knew she still had much work ahead of her, but at least she had taken a significant step forward on the road to change. Caroline Whitmore had changed a great deal since she first began attending the training program. But even though she had learned so much about how to treat others, the change within her was still incomplete. A part of her still struggled to let go of the ghosts from her past, the mistakes and prejudices she had carried for so many years. This journey was not just a lesson in work or communication. It was a battle with herself, a battle she had yet to fully win. Every morning when she woke up, Caroline reminded herself that she had been given a chance to change. But there were times when she felt as though everything was still hovering in limbo, not yet truly resolved. Sometimes she caught the looks from her colleagues, not looks of respect, but watchful gazes, as if they were still waiting for her to make another mistake so they could reevaluate her. Those stares weighed heavily on her, even though she knew that ultimately no one had the right to judge her but herself. One morning, while preparing for a new flight, Caroline unexpectedly crossed paths with Meredith Winslow, the woman who had given her the chance to change. It surprised her, not because Meredith was the founder of the airline, but because Meredith still looked at her as a human being, not as someone who had committed an unforgivable mistake. Caroline had seen so many others who were quick to criticize and cast her aside, but Meredith had not. Meredith had given her time to reflect and embark on the journey of self-discovery. "Good morning, Meredith," Caroline said, approaching her with genuine respect. Today, she no longer felt anxious or awkward speaking with her. Meredith's words still echoed in her mind. "You won't change overnight, but if you truly want to change, you must confront yourself." Meredith looked up from the book she was reading, her eyes deep and steady. "Caroline, I can see that you have made a lot of progress, but sometimes the path to true change is long and filled with challenges. You will have to confront yourself and the ghosts from your past that you've tried to avoid. Caroline nodded, feeling the strength in Meredith's words. She had changed significantly, but sometimes the memories of her past disrespect and prejudices would creep back and make her uneasy. She still felt hesitation when facing people she had once deemed unworthy of fair treatment. Meredith watched her for a long moment, then smiled gently. "I can sense that you have changed, but true change isn't just about what you do on the outside. Real change comes from within, from confronting yourself and learning how to love yourself." Meredith's words flowed over Caroline like a refreshing breeze. It wasn't just a lesson about behavior. It was a lesson about forgiveness and acceptance. Caroline understood that to truly change, she needed to forgive herself. She needed to let go of the deeply ingrained prejudices and realize that every human being deserves fair treatment, not because they meet her standards, but simply because they are human. After meeting with Meredith, Caroline felt as though she had taken another step forward on her journey of transformation. She had learned not just how to treat passengers, but how to look at herself with fairness and honesty. She no longer saw herself as someone superior, but as someone who was constantly learning and striving to improve. A week later, as she was preparing for her next flight, Caroline received an email from the airline's CEO requesting her attendance at an important meeting. She had no idea what it would be about, but the familiar sense of anxiety returned, leaving her feeling slightly uneasy. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had done her best, and now she simply needed to face whatever decision awaited her. The meeting took place in a large conference room, where the CEO and several senior executives were waiting. Caroline didn't know what they wanted, but she sensed that she was standing at a crucial crossroads. After the initial greetings, the CEO looked up at her, his gaze sharp but not threatening. "Caroline," he began, "I want to inform you that we are very impressed with your progress over the past period. However, as we discussed before, this transformation will not be easy, and it must continue over the long term. We have decided that we will continue to monitor your development and hold regular review meetings." Caroline felt a wave of relief wash over her. She knew she hadn't done everything perfectly, but at least she had made real strides. And this time she understood that she wasn't changing just to keep her job. She was changing because she truly wanted to become a better person, not just for the company, but for herself. Caroline Whitmore had thought she had learned all the important lessons from her training and the changes she had undergone. But life, as always, had its way of challenging even the things people believed most firmly. The transformation Caroline had experienced was not easy, and sometimes the greatest challenges came when she least expected them. After completing her training, Caroline returned to her job with an entirely new spirit. She was no longer the arrogant, quick-to-judge flight attendant she had once been, but someone ready to learn from every situation and confront her own mistakes. However, this change was not easy, and she began to realize that transforming oneself wasn't just about learning lessons. It was about continuously applying them in real life. One morning, Caroline received a notice that she would be serving on a long international flight with a very special group of passengers. Among them were some famous business figures and important individuals from the aviation industry. It was a great opportunity to prove how much she had changed, but also a major challenge. This flight would have many high-profile passengers, and Caroline knew it was her chance to demonstrate her transformation. However, when she arrived in the first-class area, she immediately sensed the tension in the air. The passengers around her did not seem willing to easily accept her change. They looked at her with scrutinizing eyes, as if challenging her every move. They had not forgotten her past mistakes, and it made Caroline feel as if she were standing before an invisible wall. As the flight began, Caroline felt the tension building. She knew she had to face the challenges ahead without relying on any trace of complacency. Passengers started boarding, and immediately she noticed a familiar figure, Meredith Winslow. She settled into a first-class seat, maintaining the same calm demeanor as during their last encounter. But this time, Meredith wasn't there to help Caroline. This time, Caroline would have to step forward and face the test on her own. Caroline approached her and gently greeted Meredith. But this time, Meredith was different. There was no friendly smile or encouraging word, only a deep, knowing gaze. Meredith's eyes seemed to observe Caroline, not to judge her, but to see how she would handle herself. "Good morning, Meredith," Caroline said, her voice firm though tinged with a trace of anxiety. Meredith simply offered a faint smile without speaking, but her gaze carried an invisible pressure. Caroline knew Meredith was watching, not with high expectations, but with the calm steadiness she always possessed. It felt as though Meredith was testing her, not to judge, but to see how steadfast she could remain. Later, as the flight progressed smoothly, an incident occurred. A first-class passenger suddenly requested a seat change. It was not an easy situation to handle, especially in such a tense atmosphere. Caroline felt a flicker of panic, but then she remembered everything she had learned. She took a deep breath and approached the passenger with patience and respect. "Hello? How may I assist you?" Caroline asked, her voice calm despite the pressure she felt with every word. The passenger looked up at her, clearly dissatisfied. "I don't want to sit next to this person," he said, pointing at the neighboring passenger. "I want to change seats." Caroline looked at the passenger, steadying herself. This wasn't the first time she had encountered difficult requests, but this time was different. She couldn't allow impatience or judgment to control her actions. She bowed her head slightly and replied, "I'll do my best to help you. However, I hope we can resolve this matter respectfully and fairly for everyone involved." She could feel the other passengers watching her closely. She knew this was her moment, not just to resolve the issue, but to demonstrate through her actions that she had truly changed. Once the situation was resolved, Caroline returned to her duties. But as she passed through the first-class cabin, she caught Meredith's gaze once again. Meredith didn't speak, but her look said everything. It wasn't encouragement, it was acknowledgement. She had seen Caroline stand firm, face the challenge, and not allow small difficulties to shake her resolve. That evening, as the flight ended and Caroline prepared to disembark, she realized something crucial. Change wasn't something achieved in a single day. It was a long journey, and each challenge, each tense moment, was an opportunity to prove to herself that she could do better, that she could overcome her limits. Caroline stepped off the plane not as someone who hadn't failed, but as someone who had learned how to stand tall in the face of adversity. Every step she took now was not just professional progress, but a profound, complete transformation from within. Caroline Whitmore never thought she would have to face a challenge as great as this. After months of changing, learning, and confronting her past mistakes, she believed she was ready to start anew. But life never lets us rest for long. After all, the true tests often come when we least expect them. A week after completing the international flight, Caroline was summoned to the CEO's office. She didn't know how to prepare herself this time. Unlike before, she didn't feel fear or anxiety. Instead, there was a sense of anticipation, as if she knew a crucial door was about to open, a door she could not turn back from. When she stepped into the office, the airline's CEO, Stephen Caldwell, was waiting for her, his expression unreadable. Caroline noticed that several other senior executives were present as well, all watching her with sharp, piercing gazes. "Caroline," CEO Caldwell began, his voice cold, "we have been monitoring your progress for some time now. What you've achieved is impressive, but it's still not enough." Caroline felt the tension in the air, but she forced herself to remain calm, refusing to let anxiety take control. I understand," she said. "I know I still have a lot to learn." Caldwell didn't respond immediately. He simply studied her, as if evaluating everything she had endured and accomplished. "In fact," he said at last, "I have a new challenge for you." His words made Caroline's heart pound in her chest. "We are about to launch a new international route, and you will lead the flight crew for its inaugural trip. This flight will be extremely important, carrying executive passengers and high-profile VIPs. It's your chance to prove that everything you've learned isn't just theory, but real, practical change." Caroline could hardly believe her ears. She knew this was a huge opportunity, but at the same time, she understood that it would be the greatest challenge of her career. A flight filled with VIPs, where every action would be under intense scrutiny. If she failed, it wouldn't just be her failure. Those who had trusted her would also be implicated. She nodded, striving to maintain her composure. "I will do my best," Caroline said, her voice steady, though a quiet anxiety stirred inside her. Caldwell gave a faint smile and his gaze softened slightly. "I believe you won't disappoint us. But know this. This will be your final test. After this flight, we will decide whether you are truly ready to continue your career with the airline." A hollow feeling swept over Caroline. She knew she could not afford to fail. This was her ultimate chance to prove herself, to show that she had changed, not merely through promises, but through real, tangible actions. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She had to become a true leader, someone capable of guiding her team and setting an example for others. As the day of the flight approached, Caroline could feel the tension thickening. She prepared meticulously for everything, checking every detail, from luggage management to the seating arrangements for the passengers. This wasn't an ordinary flight. It was a flight filled with the powerful, where every small movement would be closely observed. On the morning of the flight, Caroline stood in front of the mirror in the crew's dressing room, trying to calm herself. She took a deep breath and looked herself in the eye. She had faced countless challenges to get here, and this would be yet another. But this time she wasn't facing it with fear. She carried the confidence she had built through every trial. She knew that only patience, composure, and respect would see her through. As she entered the first-class cabin, the heavy atmosphere weighed on her, but she refused to back down. Everything had to be perfect. First, she greeted each passenger politely and professionally. Every word, every gesture needed to exude confidence and respect. Shortly after takeoff, a minor issue arose when one of the passengers requested a seat change. At first, Caroline felt a flash of tension, but she quickly calmed herself and handled the situation professionally. She didn't let the pressure cloud her judgment. As the flight continued, Caroline gradually sensed the change within herself. She wasn't just working for the sake of doing her job. She was working out of genuine respect for her passengers and her colleagues. Every action, every decision she made reflected her growth and her unwavering determination to improve. When the plane finally landed, Caroline felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She had passed this test. It hadn't been a perfect flight, but she had achieved things she once never thought herself capable of. Caroline Whitmore felt as though she had just crossed a major milestone in her life. After the flight with VIP passengers, filled with endless challenges and tension, she experienced a profound sense of relief. For the first time in her entire career, she genuinely felt confident about what she had accomplished. However, she knew that she could never fully rest on her journey of transformation. Ultimately, every decision still depended on the judgment of the leadership. The next day, Caroline received a notice from the airline's CEO. She didn't know whether it would be a meeting to congratulate her on her achievements or a meeting to inform her of her dismissal. She had mentally prepared herself for both outcomes, but she could not entirely suppress the anxiety brewing within her. When she stepped into the CEO's office, Director Caldwell and the other senior executives were already seated, waiting. The room was silent, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner and the faint sounds from the hallway. Everything seemed to freeze before Caroline's eyes. She stood for a moment, feeling her heart pounding. After a few tense seconds, Director Caldwell finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying weight. "Caroline," Caldwell began, "I want to say that we are very impressed with the changes you have made over the past period, not only in your work, but also in your attitude and how you have confronted your past mistakes," he said, his sharp eyes looking directly at Caroline. Caroline swallowed hard, her heart tightening, but she managed to maintain her composure. "Thank you, sir. I have learned a great deal during this journey of change," she replied. Caldwell studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the truth he had witnessed. "We have seen your growth and determination throughout this time. You have not only changed how you view your work, but you have also changed how you view yourself. However, this is not a simple process. You will have to continue facing even greater challenges." Caroline felt the atmosphere in the room grow even heavier. She still couldn't exhale in relief. "So, what is the company's final decision?" Caroline asked, her voice soft but betraying her inner tension. Director Caldwell tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving Caroline. "After thoroughly reviewing everything you have done and the progress you have achieved, we have decided not to terminate your employment. Instead, we are offering you a promotion. We believe you can lead a team of flight attendants and help the company grow in a more positive direction. However, this also means you will face greater responsibilities and more difficult challenges." Caroline could hardly believe her ears. She had braced herself for losing her job, yet now she was receiving an opportunity she had never even dared hope for. A rush of emotions flooded her: relief, gratitude, and even a twinge of guilt for having doubted herself. "Thank you, sir," Caroline said, her voice trembling slightly. "I will not let you down. I will do everything in my power to prove I am worthy of this opportunity." Director Caldwell nodded. "We have faith in you. However, as I mentioned, this is only the beginning. We will continue to monitor your progress over the coming months. You will be responsible for supervising a team of attendants on long-haul flights and during key company events. The most important thing is that you must maintain this transformation and continue to grow." As the meeting ended, Caroline felt a wave of relief, but she also clearly understood that the real challenge had only just begun. Being entrusted with a more significant position did not mean she had completely won. She would have to continue facing challenges, doubts from others, and doubts from within herself. But what mattered most was that she now had an opportunity that not everyone was fortunate enough to receive. Caroline Whitmore had come a long way since the day she first met Meredith Winslow at the boarding gate. Her journey was not merely about her career. It was an internal battle to change herself, to confront her mistakes, and to learn how to start over. After months of relentless effort, she had finally been given a chance to prove that real change could come from within. Her first long-haul flight in her new position was the greatest challenge of Caroline's career. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She had to lead a team, setting an example for those around her, those who were watching her every move, waiting for her to fail. Change wasn't just a slogan she could speak. It was action she had to demonstrate every day through her communication with colleagues, her handling of situations, and her ability to face people who might still doubt her transformation. That day, Caroline prepared for the most important flight of her career. It was her first time leading a team of flight attendants for a VIP flight, carrying several executives and important figures in the aviation industry. All eyes would be on her. One wrong decision could cost her everything she had fought so hard to achieve. Standing before the mirror in the crew dressing room, Caroline adjusted her uniform. She no longer felt the old nervousness, but there was still a slight anxiety lingering. She knew this was her one chance to prove that she had truly changed, and that she was worthy of the trust the company and others had placed in her. As the flight began, Caroline felt as though she was facing a greater challenge than ever before. Each passenger boarding the plane presented a new test. She couldn't simply perform her job well. She had to create a comfortable professional environment for every passenger, no matter who they were. She looked at the faces around her. No fear, no hesitation. She knew she had made significant progress, but now was the time to act and to prove it. Everything went smoothly until an incident occurred. One of the first-class passengers requested to change seats. It was a delicate situation, especially with VIPs involved, but Caroline didn't hesitate. She approached the passenger with a gentle smile and a soft voice. "Hello, how can I assist you?" she asked. Though tension rose inside her, she didn't let it show. The passenger stared at her for a moment and pointed at his seat. "I want to change my seat," he said bluntly. Caroline showed no signs of irritation or confusion. She had learned to remain calm and to handle every situation with the utmost respect. "I'll do my best to assist you," she replied. "However, we need to ensure we do this without disrupting the flight. If possible, could you share the reason for the change so I can better accommodate your request?" The passenger looked at her for a long moment, seemingly persuaded by Caroline's calm demeanor. Finally, he nodded and agreed to a reasonable seating adjustment. When the situation was resolved smoothly, Caroline felt a swell of pride within her. It was the first time she'd handled a difficult situation without letting personal emotions interfere. She had done the right thing, not just by following protocol, but by truly respecting each passenger. When the flight ended, Caroline felt like she had truly overcome a major hurdle. Not because the flight was perfect, but because she had maintained the calmness and respect she had worked so hard to develop. After all the passengers had disembarked, Caroline entered the dressing room where Director Caldwell was waiting for her. He smiled as she walked in, but this time there was no harshness in his eyes. "Caroline, I have to say I'm very impressed with how you handled today's situation," he said, his voice much softer. "You've proven that change isn't just words, it's action." A strong wave of emotion surged within Caroline. She had done it. She hadn't just survived the challenge, she had become a model of change and growth. Director Caldwell continued, "We have decided that you will continue to serve as lead flight attendant for our upcoming long-haul flights. This is a confirmation of the trust we now place in you." Caroline could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had truly made it through, and now she could stand tall and continue along the path she had chosen. Change wasn't just about recognizing mistakes. It was about perseverance and never giving up. She felt proud that she had achieved it. With a gentle smile on her face, Caroline walked out of the dressing room. She no longer felt fear or tension. She knew the journey was far from over, but at least she had overcome the hardest battles. And on the road ahead she would continue forward, steadfast and more confident than ever before. The story of Caroline Whitmore is a journey full of challenges and inspiration, a testament to the fact that real change can come from within ourselves. Change is not always easy or quick. It is a continuous process requiring us to confront our past mistakes, learn from them, and constantly strive to improve. But the most important thing Caroline learned was humility, self-awareness, and the ability to forgive herself. 1. Change begins within ourselves. Caroline could not change the past, but she could change how she faced her mistakes and learned from them. The true journey of transformation begins when we acknowledge our faults and accept that we are not perfect. Change is not merely about following a new set of procedures. It's about a shift in mindset and attitude toward life. 2. Perseverance and never giving up. The path to change demands perseverance. Sometimes we will encounter challenges that seem insurmountable, but only by persisting and refusing to give up can we grow and move forward. Caroline had to face doubt and judgment from those around her, but she never allowed them to deter her from her course. 3. Respect and fair treatment for everyone. One of the most important lessons Caroline learned was to respect everyone around her, regardless of who they were. Change isn't just about shifting how we view ourselves, it's also about how we treat others. Every person deserves to be treated with respect and fairness, and by setting an example, we help create a positive and compassionate environment. 4. Don't be afraid to face the truth. Caroline had to face the truth about herself and her mistakes. Facing the truth can be painful, but only by confronting it can we grow and change. Admitting mistakes and learning from them is a critical step toward maturity. 5. The opportunity to change is always there, but it requires action. Every mistake brings an opportunity to learn, but if we don't act, that opportunity will slip away. Caroline was given a chance to prove herself, and she seized it with everything she had. She didn't just change her career path, she became a better version of herself. The final message is, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a long, challenging journey. But if you persevere, confront your mistakes, and learn from them, you will become a better version of yourself. Most importantly, we should never forget that everyone deserves to be treated with respect and fairness. If you found this story meaningful and full of valuable lessons, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below this video. Share your reflections on Caroline's journey and the lessons you've drawn from her story. And don't forget to subscribe to follow more inspiring stories to come.